The woman in blue kissed him and whispered goodbye. But the river had other plans. It soaked his room. It stole his reflection. It made his name echo under the surface. He tried to run, but the footprints in the mud weren't his. They led from the river to his door. And never went back. That was when he realized the water had claimed him. Welcome back. As you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also share with your friends. Now back to the story. Ao heard the river crying before he ever saw her. It wasn't the sound of rushing water or frogs or wind through trees. It was soft, heavy, and deep, like something buried in sorrow. It came from the bend near his uncle's farm, a place he had passed many times before without noticing anything strange. But that evening, just after sunset, as he walked back from the yam field alone, he stopped. The road was quiet, the sky already fading into dark blue, and the cry came again, low and broken, like a woman sobbing with her mouth half covered by water. He stood still, heart racing, eyes fixed on the path ahead. Everyone in the village had told him to avoid that bend, especially after dusk. They said that river curved like a hook because it was pulling something back. They said people who walked too close sometimes didn't come home with their mind fully whole. He had always thought it was just superstition, the kind of warning elders gave to stop young boys from wandering. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was 27. He'd left the city to escape heartbreak. He had planned to stay with his uncle for only a few weeks, work on the farm, keep his head down, and stop thinking about everything he had lost. But now the cry wouldn't stop. It sounded like something familiar, something human. So instead of walking away, he turned toward the sound and followed it. He stepped off the main path and pushed through the tall grass, slowly making his way down the gentle slope toward the water. The river was wide at that point and calm, not fast-moving or rough, just still like a mirror. The crying stopped as he got closer, and for a second he thought maybe it had been his imagination. But then he saw her. A woman was kneeling by the edge of the water with her back to him. Her long hair was soaked, clinging to her back. Her dress floated gently around her knees in the shallows. She was perfectly still, not washing, not speaking, not moving. Ao froze. He didn't want to scare her, didn't know what to say. Before he could call out, she turned. Slowly. Her eyes were red from crying and her face looked pale, almost drained. But she didn't look frightened. She just looked tired. She looked directly at him and whispered, "Did you hear me?" Her voice was soft, broken, almost like wind slipping between leaves. He nodded. She stared for a moment longer, then said, "Then you're the one," and without another word she stood up and walked past him. He turned to follow her, but she had already vanished into the trees. The ground where she walked was dry. No footprints. No sound. That night Ao didn't sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about her voice, her eyes, that strange sentence. He didn't tell his uncle or aunt. They would worry, and he didn't want prayers or fasting or morning sermons. He just needed to understand. The next day he went back to the river at the same time. She wasn't there. He went again the next day. Still nothing. But on the third day she was waiting. She sat on a rock at the edge of the water, her feet dipped in the current, her hair braided this time, dry and neat. She didn't smile when she saw him. She just said, "You came back." He nodded. "I had to." "You shouldn't have," she replied. "Why?" "Because this river doesn't like to let go." He sat beside her. "What's your name?" "Ijeoma," she said. "Yours?" "Ao." "Why are you here?" "To get away." "From what?" "Heartbreak." "That's what I heard," she said. "I only cry loud enough for those with broken hearts." He didn't know what to say. She didn't ask more questions. They just sat in silence until the moon rose. From then on he returned every evening. They never made plans, but she was always there. Some days she talked. Other days she didn't. She told him she had lived near the river for years but had no family in the village. No one knew her. She liked it that way. Ao told her everything, how the girl he loved left him for someone richer, how he felt invisible, how he came to the village to disappear quietly. Ijeoma listened, really listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't give advice, just stayed with him. Her silence felt like comfort, not distance. Over time he began to feel peace in her presence. His breathing became slower. His chest felt lighter. She made no promises, gave no declarations. But the pain in his heart began to fade. Then strange things began to happen. One night, Ao woke up with his bed soaked in water. The windows were closed. It hadn't rained. His mattress smelled like river mud. Another time he dropped his phone in the house, but when he picked it up, it was dripping wet, the screen filled with water even though there was no puddle anywhere near. He didn't understand it, but he didn't question it either. That week he went to the river every single day. Ijeoma told him about dreams she used to have. Dreams where the water spoke, where people walked into the river and never came out, not because they drowned but because they were tired of being forgotten. She asked him once, "Do you believe water can remember pain?" He said yes. She asked, "Would you stay with someone if their sadness never ended?" He didn't answer. One night, as the wind blew softly and the stars reflected on the still surface of the river, Ao looked at her and said, "I think I love you." She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She leaned close and kissed his forehead gently. Then she whispered, "You should have said goodbye when you still had the chance." She stood up, stepped into the water and walked deeper, slowly, silently, until her head disappeared beneath the surface. No splash. No ripple. Just stillness. Ao waited. 10 minutes. 20. He called her name again and again. Nothing. He stayed by the water until dawn. She never returned. When he finally got up and walked back home, his feet were soaked even though the ground was dry. His shirt clung to his body like he had walked through a river. His heartbeat was slow, heavy. He had never felt so empty and so full at the same time. And from that day forward, the river began to follow him. Her voice lived inside his head now, soft and permanent like a secret he was no longer allowed to share. Back at home, strange things began to happen. He would wake up to find water trickling from under his bed. He would mop it dry only to find it there again by morning. His clothes, no matter how dry he folded them, would always feel damp at the edges. His comb would be wet. His pillow smelled of the river. Once he placed his phone in rice after it refused to turn on, but when he powered it back, the screen showed a photo he had never taken. It was the river. Just the bend. No people. No sound. But he knew it was hers. That same curve. That same stillness. His aunt began to notice. "You look pale," she said. "Are you eating well?" He nodded. She pressed his forehead. "You're cold. But it's hot outside." He smiled faintly. "I'm fine." His uncle, a quiet man with sharp eyes, said nothing for days, just observed. Then one night, as Ao sat in the backyard, wet footprints appeared across the sand. His uncle stepped out, saw them, and froze. The prints led to Ao's door but didn't go back. The next morning, his uncle sat beside him on the wooden bench. "What did you bring back from the river?" Ao kept his eyes down. "I didn't bring anything." "Did you meet her?" Ao looked up. "You know about her?" "We all do. But we don't speak of her. That river has had a name for years. But we call it Hush." "Why?" "Because it hides everything." She said the river doesn't let go. His uncle nodded. "That's true. Especially if it touches you with sorrow." Ao swallowed hard. "She kissed my forehead." His uncle's eyes darkened. "Then part of you belongs to her now. Can I get it back?" "No. But you can learn to carry it. Or let it drown you." That night, Ao dreamed of water running through his room. He stood on his mattress as it floated slowly through the hallway, past his aunt's kitchen, past the goats, past the village square. No one noticed him. He called out but no one looked. Then he saw her. Ijeoma. Standing waist-deep in water, arms open. "You said you loved me," she whispered. "Was it only for the dry season?" He tried to reach her but the mattress began to sink. He woke up gasping, his hands soaked, the bed soaked, the floor soaked. But outside there had been no rain. In the days that followed he started hearing her voice in the water. Not clearly. Not words. Just tones. A hum. A breath. A feeling. One day he sat by the river for hours, eyes closed, listening. A single tear rolled down his cheek. The river rippled. He spoke quietly, "Why won't you come back?" The water answered with a wave that reached up and touched his feet, then backed away. He returned home but the water followed him. Not just the river's memory. Actual water. His footsteps left puddles. His shadow glistened like it had just come out of a storm. People noticed. They began to avoid him. Children whispered. Elders watched from a distance. One woman in the market threw salt behind him. Another dipped her finger in oil and traced circles on her forehead when he passed. His uncle sat him down. "You need to go and see the old one in Ijeoma. She understands the river better than anyone." Ao agreed. He packed a bag and left the next morning. The journey took half a day. Ijeoma was a quiet village with narrow footpaths and huts surrounded by thick forest. The old woman lived near the riverbank. Her skin looked like paper. Her eyes were almost white. She didn't greet him. She just said, "The water chose you." "I didn't choose it," Ao replied. "No one does. It finds the one whose soul is loudest." "Can it stop?" "Only if you return what you took." I took nothing. You took love. You took pain. You took memory. Now the river wants balance. How do I give it back? You listen. And you answer. She gave him a small black stone and said, when she comes again, ask her what she wants. But only once. If you ask twice, you'll never return. Ao returned to his uncle's village that same night. The river was louder now. The bend seemed wider. The air felt wet even when there were no clouds. He went to the river with the stone in his hand and sat on the rock where she once waited. He closed his eyes and whispered, Ijeoma, if you can hear me, I need to know what you want. The wind stopped. The trees stopped. Even the frogs went quiet. The river moved once. Just once. Then stillness. Then she appeared. Slowly rising from the surface like a memory. Not glowing. Not floating. Just there. Her eyes were not angry. They were tired. He opened his hand, showed her the stone. They told me to ask you what you want. But only once. She stepped forward. Her lips moved but no sound came. She placed her hand on his chest and he saw it. A village. A small girl by the river. A man leaving. A belly growing. A rope. A splash. Then darkness. She stepped back. Her voice finally came. I want to be remembered as more than sorrow. Then she disappeared. After that night when Ijeoma rose from the water and whispered that she wanted to be remembered as more than sorrow, Ao stopped hearing the river cry, but it didn't go silent. It changed. The sound of the water was no longer soft or distant. It became part of everything. The walls of his room creaked like the river flowed through them. His clothes no longer dried completely. His breath sometimes fogged the air even when the sun was high. People started calling him the river's son. Some with fear, some with pity, but none with understanding. He didn't speak much anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because most conversations felt too dry. Only the river still felt alive. The dreams returned. Every night. Some were quiet. Some loud. But all of them came with water. In one, he stood ankle-deep in a river that stretched endlessly in every direction, and Ijeoma stood at the far end holding a child. She didn't speak. Just turned slowly and walked away deeper into the current. In another, he was the child. Curled in her arms while she sang a song he didn't recognize, her voice filled with pain that could drown a mountain. In his waking hours, Ao began to write things. Words that didn't seem to be his. Lines that described places he'd never been, names he had never heard, like Nkiru who never came home, and the ones buried beneath the bend. He wrote on the back of his uncle's old receipts, on banana leaves, even on the mud walls with charcoal. He never remembered writing them. His uncle began to grow afraid. One night, the man walked into Ao's room and found the floor covered in water, though the roof had no leak. Ao was asleep, breathing slow, but his hands were wet, and in his fist, he held a strand of hair that looked exactly like Ijeoma's. His uncle took him to the shrine of an elder priestess who rarely spoke and never opened her eyes. She placed her hand on Ao's chest and said, "He's carrying too much that was never his." "Can you free him?" the uncle asked. The woman shook her head. "Only she can." "Who?" "The one who was forgotten by those who owed her memory. She's not angry. She's waiting." The priestess gave Ao a single black feather and told him to burn it at the edge of the river at midnight. "When it burns, speak only truth. If you lie, the water will know." That night, he stood at the bend, held the feather to a flame and watched it curl and vanish. He closed his eyes. I wasn't enough for her. Not for the girl who left me. Not for Ijeoma. I said I loved her, but I didn't ask what she needed. I thought my pain made me deep. But hers was an ocean. I stood on the edge and thought I understood. I didn't. I see that now. The water rippled once. A small current touched his toes. Then a hand rose from the surface. Not to pull. Just to touch. It grazed his ankle, soft and cold, and then slipped back under. The next morning he felt lighter. Not happy. Not free. But clearer. The water still followed him, but it no longer soaked everything. It stayed close like a quiet presence that only moved when he forgot. His aunt placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You look less lost." He smiled faintly. "I'm starting to remember." That week the river changed again. A small part near the bend dried up for the first time in years. Behind it, hidden beneath moss and stone, they found the bones of a child and a small bracelet with the name Ijeoma carved into it. The villagers gathered in silence. No one spoke until an old woman stepped forward and said, "That child belonged to the girl who vanished before the war. She was pregnant. She waited for the man who promised to return. He never did. She disappeared. We never found her. But she used to wear a bracelet just like this. They buried the child properly, said prayers, sang songs, placed white flowers beside the grave. That night, Ao sat by the river and whispered, I remember her. Her name, her sorrow, her child. I remember them now. The water didn't answer with words. It answered with peace. The frogs sang like they hadn't in weeks. The breeze smelled like yam porridge. A baby was born that night without crying and still slept peacefully. Ao closed his eyes and let his body rest. No dreams came. Just darkness. Still and soft like deep water. From that day the river never overflowed again. The bend remained calm. And though Ijeoma never appeared again, people said the fish returned in greater numbers, the soil by the edge grew fertile, and children who played by the water never tripped or slipped. Ao began to smile again. Sometimes he spoke to the river. Not for answers. Just to say thank you. The people no longer avoided him. They came to him. Asked for stories. Asked what the water taught him. He never told them everything. Just enough. Just the parts they could carry. And when he walked, his footsteps were dry. Ao no longer feared the river, but he didn't take it for granted either. He knew now that water had memory, that sorrow had a voice, and that when something is not buried with truth, it waits quietly just beneath the surface. Months had passed since the bones of Ijeoma were discovered. The village had returned to a kind of peace, but not the same as before. It was a quieter peace, one filled with respect, not ignorance. Children still played near the water, but they threw white petals in before they jumped in. Women washed their clothes in silence. The old ones greeted the river like it could listen, and sometimes Ao believed it could. He had become something in between a man and a story. The villagers didn't say it out loud, but they watched him carefully. He was the only one the river had touched without taking. He hadn't drowned. He hadn't vanished. He had returned. They came to him for advice, asking questions about dreams, about strange sounds in the wind, about what to do when the water boiled without fire. He answered only what he understood. And when he didn't, he said nothing. But even peace can feel too quiet. And one night, that quiet broke again. It started with a mirror. His aunt had received it from a visitor, a small circular one with a cracked edge. She cleaned it and placed it near the window. That night, Ao walked past it and froze. The reflection was wrong. It showed him standing beside someone. A woman, dressed in blue, hair braided, her hand on his shoulder. He turned quickly. No one was there. He looked back. The reflection was normal. Just him. But he couldn't unsee what he saw. The next day he took the mirror and buried it by the river. As he pressed soil over the glass, he heard a voice behind him. You still see me? He turned sharply. Ijeoma stood under the tree. She hadn't aged. Her eyes still carried oceans. Her feet left no marks. He stood slowly. You're here. You never stopped carrying me, she replied. I tried to let go. Letting go is not forgetting. He took a step forward. What do you need? A promise, she said. One that will last longer than memory. What kind of promise? That you will remember me as more than sorrow. As more than silence. That when the story is told, you won't stop at the pain. I promise. She looked at him, searching his face. Then I can rest. She walked toward the river. Wait, he said. Will I see you again? When the water forgets your name, she replied, and then she was gone. The days after that felt lighter, but Ao started noticing something he couldn't explain. Children began to draw pictures of a woman in blue standing near the river. They said she told them to be kind to the water. One girl said she sang to her while she was sick and that the fever broke after that night. A boy claimed he found a shiny stone on the riverbank shaped like a teardrop. It glowed slightly. He gave it to Ao and said, She said to give you this. Ao kept it in a pouch around his neck. That week, rain fell gently every night and stopped by morning. The crops grew faster. The air smelled better. But not everything stayed sweet. One afternoon, a group of young men from a neighboring village came to fish. They didn't know the stories. They laughed loudly, threw bottles into the water, and mocked the locals who told them to show respect. That night, they didn't return to their homes. A search began. Ao went to the river and sat on the same rock. He didn't call her. He didn't ask. He just whispered, I understand. The next morning, 3 bodies floated up the river. Their skin pale. No wounds. Just peace on their faces. As if they had fallen asleep. The village understood. The visitors did not return. And the river remained quiet. From that moment, a rule was placed. No fishing after dusk. No bathing at night. No shouting by the water. and always greet the river first. Ao became the keeper of the bend. Not because he wanted to be, but because no one else could. The villagers built a small wooden seat near the curve, shaded by palm trees, and that was where he spent most evenings. He carved symbols into the wood, ones that came to him in dreams. Spirals. A woman's silhouette. He said little, but when he spoke, people listened. One day, a young woman came from the city. A researcher. She asked to speak with Ao. She said she was collecting forgotten stories. At first, he didn't answer. But then she showed him something. A name. Ijeoma. Scribbled in an old notebook from her grandmother. She said her grandmother used to dream of a woman drowning with a baby in her arms. The dream stopped after she moved away from the village. But the name stayed. Ao told her everything. Not in the way a man speaks to another, but the way water speaks to rock. Slowly. Gently. Without rush. The researcher wrote nothing down. She just listened. At the end she asked, "How do you want her remembered?" Ao looked at the river. As a woman who cried so loud even the earth had to listen. And you? As the man who chose not to forget. She left a small cowrie by the water before she went home. That night, Ao dreamed of Ijeoma one last time. She stood under the moonlight, holding the baby close to her chest. She smiled. Not the sad smile. A full one. The kind people rarely give unless they've finally been seen. She said nothing. She just turned and walked into the water. And this time, the river closed over her gently, like it was tucking her in. Years passed, but Ao did not leave the village. He remained in the small compound near the river bend, in the house his uncle left behind when old age finally pulled him away in his sleep. Ao buried him under the shade of the tall palm tree, close enough to the river so the old man could still hear it if he ever listened. People no longer questioned why Ao stayed. He had become part of the land. The villagers called him the keeper, the one the river listened to, the one who once spoke to a spirit and didn't go mad. But Ao didn't carry pride. He carried memory. He did not speak of Ijeoma anymore, but he remembered her every day. In the breeze that brushed his window at dawn. In the strange dreams that visited him whenever he forgot to greet the water before sleeping. In the humming of little girls when they skipped stones by the bend. And then one evening the story changed again. It was during Harmattan, when the air was dry and the wind carried dust instead of scent. Ao had just come back from the market when he saw a child sitting by the river, alone. She couldn't have been more than 4. Her feet were bare, her dress light blue. She was tracing circles in the mud with her finger. He looked around. No one else in sight. He walked up to her slowly. "Little one, where is your mother?" She looked up. Her eyes were large and familiar. Deep, calm, heavy. "She went to find fish," the girl replied. "Where?" "In the deep water." "What's your name?" "Kayamika," she said. "But she calls me a wheel." "Who?" "The woman who sings to me when I sleep." Ao's chest tightened. He sat beside her. "Where are you from?" "Nowhere. I just woke up here." "How long have you been here?" "Since the river started singing." "Are you cold?" She shook her head. "The river keeps me warm." He offered her water from his calabash. She touched it then smiled. "Yours tastes like home." He took her to the compound. Fed her warm yam. Gave her a wrapper to sleep in. That night, she hummed in her sleep. The same melody Ijeoma used to hum. Slow, soft, wordless. Like a lullaby that remembered its own sorrow. He didn't sleep. He sat on the floor beside her and watched her breathe. The next morning she asked for a bowl. He gave her one, thinking she wanted food. But she took it to the river, filled it with water, and placed 3 white pebbles inside. Then she whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked. "For remembering her." "Who?" "The woman who cried beneath the bend." His knees gave way. He sat on the ground and stared at her. "Who are you truly?" She looked at him and said, "I'm what was left behind." From that day Kayamika stayed. No one came to claim her. The village accepted her without question. Some said she was sent by the river. Others believed she was a second chance. Ao raised her with care. He taught her stories, songs, silence. She grew fast. By the time she was 8, she could predict rain before the clouds came. She could name all the fish in the water without seeing them. She never feared the river. She walked near it barefoot even at night. And when others worried, Ao would say, "She belongs to the calm." Once, during a dry season when the crops began to brown, she placed her hands on the soil and whispered. That night, rain fell only on their side of the village. Just enough to feed the roots. Not a drop spilled elsewhere. No one asked her how. They simply said thank you. Another time, a young boy wandered too far into the river. The current dragged him under. Before anyone could move, Kayamika was already in the water. She dove without hesitation. Seconds later she walked out dry, holding the boy's hand. The boy said she didn't swim. He said the water pushed him upward, and a voice said, "Tell a wheel to come home now." Ao watched her that night. She stared at the river like it was her twin. He asked her quietly, "Do you still hear her?" She nodded. "Every time I breathe." When she turned 10 she began to draw. On walls. On wood. In the sand. Always the same image. A woman in blue walking into water with a child on her back. Ao asked, "Is that you?" "No," she replied. "That's the memory of me." "And the woman?" "She's waiting to see if I'll come back." "Will you?" "I don't know yet." One night, Ao dreamed of Ijeoma again. She stood under the moonlight with Kayamika beside her. They didn't speak. They just held hands. He reached for them, but his legs were too heavy. When he woke up, Kayamika was already at the river, barefoot, humming. He joined her, said nothing. Just sat. The river no longer followed him. It followed her. The villagers knew. They came to her when their babies couldn't sleep, when the air felt wrong, when dreams spoke too loud. She would place water on their forehead and say, "It's not you. It's something old passing through." And it would stop. Ao watched all of it. With awe. With fear. With love. He didn't try to understand. He simply accepted. That the girl he found by the water was not just a child. She was a story. A continuation. A reminder that grief never ends, it just changes shape. And some grief becomes a gift. The morning Ao knew his time had come was quiet. No wind. No birds. Even the frogs near the bend were silent. He woke slowly, not from pain but from the kind of stillness that tells the body something important is about to happen. He sat up from his mat, looked around his small room and felt no fear. The air smelled of damp earth, not from rain but from something deeper. He walked outside, the sun just beginning to stretch its fingers across the trees. Kayamika was already at the river. She always was. Barefoot, calm, watching. He stood behind her, hands folded behind his back. She turned before he spoke. "You're leaving soon," she said. He nodded. "Yes." "Are you ready?" "I don't know. But I'm not afraid." She stepped closer and took his hand. "She says thank you." He smiled. "And I thank her for not dragging me under when she had the chance." Kayamika didn't laugh. She simply rested her head against his arm and said, "You gave her a story. Not just an ending." That day, Ao walked through the village one last time. He greeted everyone he passed. He helped the young boys fix the roof of the small shrine. He carried firewood for the pregnant woman near the yam barn. He gave a little boy his lucky stone and said, "Only hold it when you miss someone." At sunset he returned home. Ate a bowl of soft yam. Drank river water from his oldest calabash. He told Kayamika stories of his childhood until the moon rose. Then he lay on his mat and said, "If I don't wake, don't cry." She didn't promise. Instead, she sat by his side and held his hand until his breathing grew shallow, like waves pulling back. His chest rose once more then stopped. He was gone. The villagers came at dawn. Not because she called them. They just knew. One by one they gathered outside his compound. No one wailed. No one tore their clothes. They stood in a circle and hummed softly. The same tune Ao once heard Ijeoma hum at the river bend. Kayamika didn't shed a tear. She washed his body with warm water from the river. She dressed him in white. She placed 3 cowries in his hand and whispered, "You remembered." That's all she ever wanted. They buried him under the palm tree beside his uncle, the tree that had once watched over the quiet house before grief came and made it holy. That night the river glowed. No one saw it except Kayamika. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, like breath. She walked to the bend, barefoot as always, and sat on the same rock Ao had once used. She placed her hand on the surface of the water. "I'm still here," she whispered. "But I'll come when it's time." The river rippled once as if nodding, then stilled. Years passed. The village changed. New people came. Roads improved. Some old ways faded. But the river remained. And by the bend, a wooden seat stood, carved with symbols that no one understood unless they listened closely. Kayamika grew. She stayed in the same house, kept it quiet, sacred. People visited from far away just to sit with her. They asked her about loss, about love, about what to do when sorrow won't leave. She never gave them rituals. She gave them silence. Water to touch. A story to carry. And sometimes when they were ready, she told them about a woman who cried so loudly that even a river broke its silence. about a man who listened when everyone else walked away, and about how grief can become something holy if held gently. One day an artist from the city came. He wanted to build a statue near the river to honor Ao to preserve the story. He showed her drawings of tall figures, stone faces, metal arms. She shook her head and said, "He doesn't need to be remembered like that." "Then how should he be remembered?" he asked. She took him to the bend and said, "Build nothing. Just sit. Listen. And if you hear anything, carry it home in silence." The artist sat for 3 days. On the 4th he returned to the city and never spoke of what he heard. Kayamika remained. As her hair turned gray, her steps slower, people began to whisper that she was older than she looked. Some said she was not born but sent. Children asked if she would ever leave. She smiled and said, "Only when the river forgets my name." And the children would laugh because they knew the river remembered everything. When she finally passed, no one saw her die. Her door was open, her mat untouched, her water bowl still full. But her wrapper was folded neatly on the rock by the bend, and 3 cowries sat in a line beside it. No body was found. No prints. Just peace. The river flowed as always, calm and endless. The villagers didn't bury her. They didn't search. They knew where she had gone. She had returned home. Back to the deep. Back to the woman who sang lullabies without words. Back to the story that never truly ended. And from that day the river at the bend became a place of memory. Not for the dead, but for those learning to live with what couldn't be fixed. People came not to cry but to breathe, to sit, to listen. And if they were quiet enough, they would hear the sound of a woman humming, and sometimes, a man laughing softly in response. The river no longer held sorrow. It held memory. And it never let go. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe and turn on your notification for more. See you soon.